I was loading the last of my rock salt bags into my garage when I noticed something that made my blood run cold: tire tracks in the fresh snow leading right up to where I'd been storing my winter supplies. And 6 bags were missing. The winter storm had hit Rockford, Illinois harder than anyone expected. It was the kind of storm that shut down schools, closed businesses, and made every store within a 50-mile radius completely sold out of rock salt within hours. I'd been smart, though, or so I thought. 3 weeks before the storm hit, I'd purchased 20 bags of rock salt from a supplier in Wisconsin, spending nearly $400 to make sure my driveway and walkway would be safe all winter long. I'd stacked them neatly against my garage side wall, under a tarp to keep them dry. Now, as I stood there in the bitter cold, my breath forming clouds in the frigid air, I counted again. 14 bags. There should have been 20. I'd only used 2 so far, which meant someone had taken 6 bags of my salt. The tire tracks were fresh, maybe an hour old, and they led down my driveway and turned left toward the main road that wound through Oakmont Hills, my supposedly upscale neighborhood. My name is Ethan Zimmerman, and I'd moved into this neighborhood 2 years ago thinking it would be a peaceful place to settle down after my divorce. The houses were nice, the streets were clean, and everyone seemed friendly enough at first. Then I met the HOA board, specifically Patricia Henderson, the HOA president, who seemed to think she owned not just her house, but everyone else's too. I pulled out my phone and checked the security camera I'd installed above my garage door last summer. The footage was grainy because of the snow, but it was clear enough. At 2:47 p.m. that afternoon, a white pickup truck with the Oakmont Hills HOA logo on the side had pulled into my driveway. 2 men I didn't recognize got out, looked around, and then started loading my rock salt bags into the truck bed. The whole thing took less than 5 minutes. I felt my jaw clench as I watched the video again. They didn't even try to hide what they were doing. They just walked up and took my property like they had every right to it. I immediately called the non-emergency police line. "Rockford Police, how can I help you?" the dispatcher answered. "I need to report a theft. My HOA just stole rock salt from my property and I have it on video." There was a pause. "Your HOA stole rock salt from you?" "Yes. 6 bags worth about $120. I have clear video footage of their truck and the people who took it." "All right, sir. We'll send an officer to take a report. What's your address?" I gave her my information and waited. The police response time in Rockford was usually pretty good, but with the storm, I figured it might take a while. I was wrong. Officer David Martinez showed up within 30 minutes, his patrol car carefully navigating the icy streets. "Mr. Zimmerman?" he asked as I opened the door. "That's me. Thanks for coming out in this weather. Part of the job. Now, you said your HOA stole rock salt from you." I showed him the video footage on my phone and his eyebrows went up. "That's pretty clear," he said. "That's definitely theft." "Do you know why they would take it?" "I have a theory," I said. "The HOA is responsible for salting the common areas in the neighborhood, the sidewalks, the community center parking lot, that kind of thing. I'm guessing they didn't plan ahead and ran out." Officer Martinez took notes and made a copy of the video. "I'll need to speak with the HOA board. Do you have contact information for them?" I gave him Patricia Henderson's phone number and address. She lived just 4 houses down from me in a large colonial that she constantly bragged about during neighborhood gatherings. "I'm going to head over there now," Officer Martinez said. "We take property theft seriously, even if it's just rock salt. With the storm, supplies are hard to come by, which actually makes this more serious in terms of value." "I appreciate that. Can I come with you?" He shook his head. "Better if you don't. Let me handle this officially first. I'll give you a call after I speak with them." I watched him drive away, feeling a small sense of satisfaction. Patricia Henderson was about to get a very unpleasant visit from the police, and I couldn't say she didn't deserve it. 2 hours later, my phone rang. It was Officer Martinez. "Mr. Zimmerman, I spoke with Mrs. Henderson. She admitted that the HOA took the rock salt from your property. She claims she thought it was fair game because you had it stored outside, and according to her, all residents are supposed to contribute to community welfare during emergencies." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's ridiculous. It was on my property under a tarp, clearly my personal supply." I explained that to her. She's agreed to return the rock salt, though she says they've already used 3 of the 6 bags. She's willing to pay for those 3 bags. "At what price?" I asked. She mentioned $30 per bag, which she says is what the HOA usually pays. "No," I said flatly. "Absolutely not. Those bags are currently impossible to find. I checked every store in the area this morning. Home Depot, Lowe's, even the small hardware stores, everyone's sold out. The replacement value is much higher." Officer Martinez was quiet for a moment. "That's actually a good point. In legal terms, you're entitled to replacement value, not what she usually pays. What would it cost you to replace them right now?" "There's a guy on Facebook Marketplace selling bags for $90 each. He's price gouging because of the shortage, but that's the current market rate. Plus, I'd have to drive to Peoria to pick them up, which is an hour and a half each way in normal weather. In this storm, it could take 3 hours one way. So we're talking about $90 per bag plus my time and gas. I'd suggest documenting all of this. Take screenshots of the Facebook Marketplace listings. Calculate your time and mileage. You might need to take this to small claims court if the HOA won't pay a fair replacement value." After hanging up with Officer Martinez, I started thinking about this differently. Patricia Henderson and the HOA had stolen from me, used my property without permission, and now they were trying to lowball me on replacement value. But more than that, they were responsible for maintaining the common areas, and they'd failed to plan properly for a completely predictable winter storm. How many other residents had they stolen from, or were planning to steal from? I decided to take a walk through the neighborhood, storm or no storm. I bundled up in my heavy winter coat, boots, and gloves and headed out into the freezing afternoon. The temperature had dropped to 15 degrees, and the wind chill made it feel like it was below zero. As I walked down Maple Ridge Drive, the main street through Oakmont Hills, I noticed something interesting. The common areas, the sidewalks that connected different sections of the neighborhood, the walking paths, the parking lot by the community center were all heavily salted. But individual driveways and private walkways weren't. That made sense until I got to Patricia Henderson's house. Her driveway was immaculate, not a trace of ice or snow. The salt had been laid down so thick that the concrete was completely visible. Her walkway was the same, and so was the path around to her backyard. I pulled out my phone and took pictures. Then I walked further and found 2 other HOA board members' houses, Gerald Foster and Linda Chen. Both of their properties were similarly oversalted, while everyone else's driveways still had patches of ice. I knocked on my neighbor Tom's door. He was a friendly guy in his 60s who'd lived in the neighborhood for 15 years. "Ethan, come in, come in. It's freezing out there," he said, ushering me inside. "Thanks, Tom. Quick question, did the HOA take any rock salt from your property?" His face darkened. "How did you know?" "Yeah, they took 4 bags from my shed yesterday." I was going to call them about it, but then I figured maybe they had some emergency authorization or something. "Did they take yours too?" 6 bags, and I called the police about it. Good for you. I paid good money for those bags. You can't find them anywhere now. Do you know if they took from anyone else? Tom thought for a moment. You should talk to Sarah Williams 3 houses down. I saw the HOA truck at her place yesterday, too. I spent the next hour going door to door, and by the end of it, I'd found 9 households that had been targeted by the HOA's rock salt raids. In total, the HOA had taken approximately 50 bags of rock salt from residents' private supplies. Some people hadn't even noticed yet, because they stored their salt in sheds or garages they didn't check regularly. That evening, I created a spreadsheet documenting everything: whose property was taken from, how many bags, the time stamps from my security camera and others who had cameras, and the current market replacement value. I also documented the oversalting at the HOA board members' houses. Then I sent an email to every resident in the neighborhood. The HOA had a community email list, and I'd saved all the addresses from previous neighborhood communications. The subject line read, HOA theft of private property, what you need to know. In the email, I explained what had happened, provided the evidence I'd gathered, and encouraged everyone to check their rock salt supplies and security camera footage if they had it. I also said Officer Martinez on the email, along with the Rockford Police Department's general email. My phone started ringing within minutes. The first call was from Jennifer Novick, a single mom who lived 2 streets over. They took 8 bags from me. 8 bags. I bought those specifically because I have a steep driveway and I can't afford to fall and hurt myself. I have 2 kids to take care of. Document everything, I told her. Take pictures of where the bags were stored, check your security cameras if you have them, and make note of the current replacement cost. We're going to make sure the HOA pays for this. The next call was from Patricia Henderson, and she was furious. How dare you send that email to the entire neighborhood? You're causing unnecessary panic and division. The HOA acted within its rights to secure emergency supplies for the common good. Patricia, you stole private property from residents. That's not within your rights. That's theft, and the police have confirmed it. You're going to return what you took and pay replacement value for what you used. The HOA will do no such thing. We'll pay the standard rate of $30 per bag, and that's generous. You should be thanking us for maintaining the common areas that benefit everyone. I felt my temper rising but kept my voice level. Let me make this very simple for you. Current replacement cost for rock salt is $90 per bag minimum. You took 6 bags from me and used 3 of them. You owe me $270 for the 3 you used, plus the return of the other 3 bags. If you don't pay, I'll take you to small claims court, and I'll win because I have video evidence of the theft and documented evidence of current market rates. This is extortion. No, Patricia, this is the consequence of stealing. And by the way, I've documented that you used stolen rock salt to heavily salt your personal driveway and walkway, not just the common areas. That's misappropriation of HOA resources at best, and potentially embezzlement at worst. She hung up on me. Over the next 2 days, the neighborhood erupted into chaos. More residents came forward with reports of missing rock salt. The total count went up to 73 bags stolen from 15 different households. The Facebook group for Oakmont Hills, which usually featured posts about lost cats and garage sale announcements, became a hotbed of angry residents demanding accountability. Patricia Henderson tried to control the narrative by calling an emergency HOA meeting. She sent out an email saying that the meeting would address community concerns about winter storm resource management. It was scheduled for 3 days after the initial theft, at the community center. The day of the meeting, the storm had passed, but the roads were still treacherous. I arrived 30 minutes early and found the parking lot already packed. Inside, the community center was standing room only. I counted at least 100 residents, far more than usually attended HOA meetings. Patricia stood at the front of the room with the other board members, Gerald Foster, Linda Chen, Marcus Webb, and Deanne Sullivan. They all looked uncomfortable except for Patricia, who wore her usual expression of superiority. "Thank you all for coming," Patricia began. "I want to address the unfortunate misunderstanding regarding rock salt distribution during last week's storm." "Misunderstanding?" someone shouted from the back. "You stole from us." Patricia's smile tightened. "The HOA has the authority, under Section 7.3 of the Community Bylaws, to commandeer resources during emergencies for the common good." I stood up. "I've read Section 7.3. It says the HOA can implement emergency assessments and request voluntary contributions during emergencies. It says nothing about taking private property without permission or compensation. That's theft, plain and simple." The room erupted in agreement. Patricia banged her gavel, which I hadn't even known HOA meetings used. "Mr. Zimmerman, you're out of order. Please sit down." "I'll sit down when you explain why your personal driveway was covered in rock salt while common areas in the neighborhood still had ice patches. I have photos." That got the room's attention. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Patricia's face flushed red. "My driveway is my concern." The HOA provided salt for common areas as required. "Using salt stolen from residents," I countered. "Salt that you then used for personal benefit. That's embezzlement of community resources." Gerald Foster, the vice president, stood up. He was a quieter guy than Patricia, an accountant by trade. "Patricia, I think we need to address this head-on. We made a mistake. We should have asked residents for voluntary donations first. We panicked when we realized we hadn't ordered enough salt for the season." Patricia glared at him. "Gerald, sit down." "No, I don't think I will." "We took property that didn't belong to the HOA. The right thing to do is return what we can and pay fair compensation for what we used. If that means depleting the HOA's emergency fund, so be it." Linda Chen nodded. "I agree with Gerald. This has gotten out of hand. We need to make this right." I pulled out my printed spreadsheet. I've documented everything. 73 bags taken from 15 households. Current market replacement value is $90 per bag. Of those 73 bags, 42 were used. That's $3,780 in compensation owed, plus return of the remaining 31 bags. The room went silent. That was a significant amount of money. Patricia finally seemed to realize she was losing control. "The HOA doesn't have $3,000 to just hand out. That would require a special assessment on all homeowners." "Then you should have thought of that before you stole from us," Jennifer Novick said, standing up with her 2 kids beside her. "I'm a single mother working 2 jobs. I budget carefully. Those 8 bags you took from me cost me $160 that I saved for over 2 months. Now I can't replace them and my driveway is a death trap. If I fall and get hurt, I'll lose work, and I can't afford that." Other residents started sharing their stories. An elderly couple who'd had 10 bags stolen. A disabled veteran who needed clear pathways for his wheelchair. A young couple with a newborn who were terrified of slipping on ice while carrying their baby. The meeting lasted nearly 3 hours. By the end of it, the board had voted, with Patricia being the only dissenting vote, to compensate residents at a rate of $60 per bag used and return all unused bags within 48 hours. It wasn't the full $90 per bag I'd calculated, but it was reasonable given the circumstances. But I wasn't done. After the meeting, I approached Officer Martinez, who'd attended to observe. What about the personal use of HOA resources? Patricia Henderson and the other board members used salt that was stolen from residents, as well as salt from the HOA's own supply, to salt their personal driveways far beyond what's necessary. Officer Martinez nodded. That's a good point. That could potentially be embezzlement or misappropriation of HOA funds. You'd need to file a formal complaint with the HOA and possibly pursue civil action. The police can't really get involved unless there's clear evidence of criminal embezzlement, which would require a full audit of HOA finances. Then I want a full audit. The next day, I filed a formal complaint with the HOA board, requesting a complete audit of the HOA's finances for the past 2 years, specifically looking at the purchase and distribution of rock salt and other maintenance supplies. Under Illinois law, HOA members have the right to inspect financial records, and they have to comply within a reasonable time frame. Patricia tried to fight it, of course. She sent me a letter stating that my request was overly broad and motivated by spite rather than legitimate concern. I responded with a letter from a lawyer I'd consulted, explaining that, under the Illinois Condominium Property Act and the Illinois Common Interest Community Association Act, I had every right to inspect the financial records. The lawyer's letterhead alone was enough to make Patricia back down. The audit took 2 weeks. I hired a forensic accountant named Rachel Stern, and several other residents pooled money to contribute to her fee. What Rachel found was shocking. Patricia Henderson had been skimming money from the HOA for years. It started small, a few $100s here and there, disguised as administrative expenses or maintenance supplies. But over time, it had grown. She'd been billing the HOA for rock salt purchases, but buying cheaper salt in smaller quantities and pocketing the difference. She'd been doing the same with landscaping services, snow removal, and even the community pool maintenance. In total, Rachel estimated that Patricia had embezzled approximately $47,000 over 4 years. But it got worse. The other board members weren't entirely innocent either. Gerald Foster had been using HOA funds to pay for repairs on his personal rental property by disguising them as community center repairs. Linda Chen had been billing the HOA for consulting fees that were never properly documented. The whole board was corrupt to varying degrees, though Patricia was by far the worst offender. I compiled all of Rachel's findings into a comprehensive report and sent it to every resident in the neighborhood, along with the Rockford Police Department and the Illinois Attorney General's office. This wasn't just about rock salt anymore. This was about systemic fraud and embezzlement. The police response was swift this time. Detective Sarah Morrison from the Economic Crimes Unit contacted me 3 days after receiving the report. "Mr. Zimmerman, this is a very serious allegation. We'll need to conduct our own investigation, but based on what you've provided, there's probable cause to believe crimes have been committed. What happens now? We'll execute search warrants for the financial records of the HOA and the personal finances of the board members. We'll conduct interviews. If the evidence supports criminal charges, we'll make arrests. This process can take several months. Whatever it takes, these people have been stealing from the community for years." The investigation moved surprisingly quickly, probably because Rachel's audit had done most of the heavy lifting. 2 months after the rock salt incident, on a cold March morning, the police arrested Patricia Henderson, Gerald Foster, and Linda Chen. The charges included embezzlement, theft, fraud, and conspiracy. Marcus Webb and Deanne Sullivan cooperated with investigators and were given immunity in exchange for their testimony. The story made local news. HOA president arrested for embezzlement after rock salt theft exposed. Read the headline in the Rockford Register-Star. The reporter interviewed me, and I explained how the whole thing had started with 6 bags of stolen rock salt during an ice storm. It just goes to show, I told the reporter, that when people in power think they are above the rules, even small crimes can expose much larger corruption. If they hadn't been so arrogant about stealing rock salt, they might have gotten away with embezzling for years to come. The legal process dragged on through spring and into summer. Patricia Henderson tried to fight the charges, claiming she'd been keeping meticulous records and had done nothing wrong. But the evidence was overwhelming. The financial records showed clear patterns of fraud, and several vendors testified that Patricia had been pocketing kickbacks in exchange for awarding HOA contracts to their companies. In July, Patricia took a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to multiple counts of embezzlement and theft. The judge sentenced her to 3 years in prison and ordered her to pay full restitution to the HOA, which totaled $63,000 when you included legal fees and the cost of the forensic audit. Gerald Foster and Linda Chen also took plea deals and received shorter sentences with probation, plus restitution payments. But back to the rock salt issue, which had started this whole mess. The HOA paid out the compensation as promised, though it took several weeks for the checks to arrive. I received $360 for the 3 bags that had been used from my property, plus the return of the other 3 bags. It was more than the original value but less than I'd calculated based on emergency market rates. However, I wasn't satisfied with just getting my money back. I wanted to make sure this never happened again. At the next HOA meeting, with new board members who'd been elected in an emergency election after the arrests, I proposed a new set of bylaws. First, the HOA would maintain a minimum supply of rock salt sufficient for the entire winter season, based on the average of the past 10 years' usage. Second, the HOA would never, under any circumstances, take private property from residents without explicit written permission. Third, all HOA financial records would be audited annually by an independent third party. Fourth, no single board member would have sole authority to authorize expenditures over $500. The new bylaws passed unanimously. The new HOA president, a retired teacher named Robert Yates, was enthusiastic about the changes. "This neighborhood needed a wake-up call," he said. "We got too comfortable letting a few people make all the decisions without oversight. That stops now." As summer turned to fall and fall turned to winter again, I found myself preparing for another ice storm that was forecasted for December. This time, I bought my rock salt early, but I also noticed that the HOA had done the same. There were pallets of rock salt stacked at the community center, clearly marked and inventoried. Robert Yates had sent out an email showing photos of the supply and explaining that the HOA had budgeted properly for winter maintenance. I also invested in a better security camera system, not just for the rock salt but for general peace of mind. The camera had night vision, motion detection, and sent alerts directly to my phone. I wasn't going to be caught off guard again. When the December ice storm hit, it was actually worse than the previous year's storm. The temperature dropped to 8 degrees and freezing rain coated everything in a thick layer of ice. But this time, the HOA was prepared. The common areas were salted promptly, and the new board even organized a volunteer program where residents with extra salt could share with neighbors who'd run out. I ended up donating 5 bags to the volunteer program, which felt good. It was the kind of community cooperation that should have happened in the first place, rather than theft and corruption. One evening in January, about a year after the original rock salt incident, I ran into Jennifer Novick at the grocery store. Her kids were with her, bundled up in winter coats and arguing about which cereal to buy. "Ethan, I wanted to thank you again," she said. "If you hadn't pushed back against the HOA, who knows how long Patricia would have kept stealing from us. I just did what anyone should do when they see something wrong. No, most people would have let it go. They would have complained to their friends but never actually done anything. You stood up to them, and it made a difference. The restitution money I got back actually helped me fix my car." That might not seem like a big deal to some people, but for me, it was huge. I'm glad it helped. Her kids tugged at her sleeve, impatient to finish shopping. She laughed and started to walk away, then turned back. "By the way, I'm running for the HOA board in the spring elections. I figure if I'm going to complain about how things are run, I should be willing to help run them properly." "You've got my vote," I said. As I drove home that night, I thought about how strange it was that something as simple as rock salt had unraveled an entire conspiracy. If Patricia Henderson and her cronies had just been honest, if they'd just asked for donations or implemented a proper emergency assessment, none of this would have happened. But their arrogance and entitlement had been their downfall. The settlement checks from the embezzlement restitution started arriving in March. Every homeowner in Oakmont Hills received a portion of the recovered funds, distributed based on how long they'd lived in the neighborhood and paid HOA dues. My check was for $843. It wasn't life-changing money, but it was satisfying to know that Patricia Henderson was being held accountable. I used part of the money to buy a new snow blower, and I donated the rest to a local charity that helped low-income families with winter preparedness supplies like salt, shovels, and warm clothing. It seemed like a fitting way to close that chapter. The legal proceedings finally concluded in April with a final restitution hearing. I attended, along with about 20 other residents. Patricia Henderson looked much different than she had a year ago. She'd lost weight, her hair had gone completely gray, and she looked tired and defeated. When the judge asked if she had anything to say, she stood and faced us. "I know what I did was wrong," she said, her voice quiet. "I started taking small amounts of money because I felt like I was doing so much work for the HOA without proper compensation. It was just going to be one time, but then it became easier to rationalize it again and again. The rock salt thing, I thought I was making a smart decision to secure resources for the community. I didn't think about how it would affect individuals. I was wrong about all of it, and I'm sorry." It wasn't much of an apology, and it came way too late, but it was something. The judge accepted her statement and finalized the restitution order. Patricia would be making payments to the HOA for the next 10 years, long after she finished her prison sentence. As I left the courthouse that day, I felt a sense of closure. The whole ordeal had been exhausting and frustrating, but it had also shown me something important about community and accountability. When people work together and demand honesty from their leaders, change is possible. Oakmont Hills was a different neighborhood now. The new HOA board was transparent and responsive. They held regular meetings with open forums where residents could voice concerns. They published detailed financial reports quarterly. They even started a newsletter to keep everyone informed about maintenance schedules, upcoming projects, and community events. In June, the neighborhood held a community barbecue at the park by the community center. It was a beautiful Saturday afternoon, warm but not too hot, with a gentle breeze. Someone had set up a volleyball net, and kids were running around playing tag. Robert Yates manned the grill, flipping burgers and hot dogs with enthusiasm. I was standing by the picnic tables, eating a burger and talking with Tom from down the street, when a reporter from the Rockford Register-Star approached me. It was the same reporter who'd covered the original story. "Mr. Zimmerman, I'm doing a follow-up piece on the HOA embezzlement case. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" "Sure," I said, setting down my burger. "Looking back on everything that happened, starting with the rock salt theft, do you have any regrets about how you handled it?" I thought about it for a moment. "No regrets. I mean, I wish the whole situation had never happened in the first place. But once it did happen, I'm glad I didn't just let it go." Sometimes people think that fighting back against small injustices isn't worth the effort. They think it's easier to just absorb the loss and move on. But small injustices often hide bigger ones. If I'd let the rock salt theft slide, Patricia and the others would still be embezzling from the HOA, and who knows how much money they would have taken over the next few years. The impact of your actions went beyond just Oakmont Hills. Several other HOAs in the Rockford area have implemented new oversight measures after hearing about what happened here. You kind of started a movement. I didn't set out to start anything. I just wanted my rock salt back and fair compensation. Everything else came from that. But if it's helped other communities avoid similar problems, that's great. The reporter thanked me and went to interview other residents. I finished my burger and joined a group playing cornhole. It felt good to just be a normal member of the community again, not the guy who was always fighting with the HOA. As the sun started to set and families began packing up to head home, Jennifer Novick came over with her kids in tow. "Ethan, I wanted to let you know I won a seat on the HOA board. The election results were posted this morning. Congratulations, that's fantastic. I couldn't have done it without your example. You showed a lot of us that we have power if we're willing to use it. Just don't embezzle any money," I joked. She laughed. "Trust me, after everything we went through, that's the last thing I'd ever do. My first order of business is implementing a resident review committee to monitor board decisions. No more rubber stamps, no more blind trust. Everything out in the open." That night, as I drove home through the now familiar streets of Oakmont Hills, I reflected on how much had changed in a year and a half. It had started with 6 bags of rock salt, worth maybe $120 at the time. Such a small thing. But that small theft had exposed fraud totaling tens of thousands of dollars, and changed how an entire community governed itself. I pulled into my driveway and noticed that my motion sensor lights were working perfectly. My new security cameras silently recorded my arrival. Inside, my house was warm and comfortable. I made a cup of coffee and sat down at my computer to check emails. There was one from Robert Yates with the subject line, "Winter Preparation Plans." He'd sent it to all residents, outlining the HOA's plans for the upcoming winter season. They'd already ordered rock salt enough for the entire season based on worst-case scenario weather patterns. They'd contracted with 2 different snow removal services to ensure redundancy. They'd budgeted for emergency supplies. Every detail was documented and transparent. I smiled as I read through it. This was how an HOA should operate, not with secrecy and self-dealing, but with openness and genuine concern for the community. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom. "Did you see the news? Patricia got transferred to a minimum security facility. Time served plus good behavior means she might get out in 18 months instead of 3 years. I felt a mix of emotions about that. Part of me thought she deserved every day of her 3-year sentence. But another part of me believed that she'd learned her lesson, and that the important thing was making sure she never had the opportunity to do something like this again. I texted back, As long as she's banned from serving on any HOA board ever again, I'm okay with it. From what I heard, that's part of her plea agreement. Can never serve in any fiduciary capacity for a homeowners association in Illinois. Good, I thought. That was the important part. The punishment wasn't just about retribution, it was about preventing future harm. Over the next few months, life in Oakmont Hills continued to improve. The new HOA board approved several projects that had been neglected during Patricia's tenure. They repaved the streets, updated the playground equipment at the community park, and even installed new lighting along the walking paths for safety. More importantly, they did all of this while staying within budget and keeping residents informed every step of the way. The quarterly financial reports showed exactly where every dollar went. There were no mysterious consulting fees or inflated maintenance costs. Everything was above board. In November, as winter approached again, I found myself at Home Depot buying rock salt. I loaded 20 bags into my truck, just like I'd done 2 years earlier. But this time, I wasn't worried about anyone stealing them. I hauled them home and stacked them in my garage, properly secured and documented with photos, just in case. The first snow of the season came in early December, a light dusting that barely required any salt at all. But when the real storm hit in January, everyone was ready. The HOA had already salted the common areas before the worst of it arrived. Residents helped each other out, sharing supplies and lending snow blowers to neighbors who needed them. It was the kind of community cooperation that should have existed all along. I was outside clearing my driveway when Tom came walking up, carrying a snow shovel. "Need any help?" he asked. "I'm good, but thanks. How are your supplies holding up? Plenty of salt left." I learned my lesson bought extra early this year, though I have to say, it's nice knowing the HOA isn't going to steal it out from under me. We both laughed at that. It was funny now, in a way it hadn't been at the time. "You know what's crazy?" Tom said. "All of this started because Patricia was too cheap to buy enough rock salt and too proud to ask for help. If she just sent out an email asking residents to donate or chip in for extra supplies, people would have helped. Instead, she committed theft, got caught, and ended up exposing years of embezzlement. Talk about a self-inflicted wound." He was right. The whole thing could have been avoided with simple honesty and humility. But people like Patricia Henderson don't think that way. They think rules don't apply to them, that their position gives them special privileges. And they keep thinking that way until they face real consequences. In March, I received a letter from the Illinois Attorney General's office. They'd used the Oakmont Hills case as a template for investigating other HOA fraud across the state. The letter thanked me for my cooperation and informed me that their investigation had uncovered similar patterns of embezzlement in 17 other HOAs in Illinois. Dozens of board members were facing charges, and millions of dollars were being recovered for homeowners. It was surreal to think that my complaint about stolen rock salt had cascaded into such a large investigation, but it made sense. HOAs often operated with minimal oversight, handling significant amounts of money with little accountability. People trusted their neighbors to do the right thing, and sometimes that trust was misplaced. I framed the letter from the Attorney General's office and hung it in my home office, not out of pride but as a reminder. A reminder that speaking up matters, that holding people accountable matters. That small acts of courage can lead to larger changes. Summer came and went, and as fall arrived again, I realized I'd lived in Oakmont Hills for 3 years now. It felt like much longer, given everything that had happened. The neighborhood had truly become a community in the best sense of the word. People looked out for each other. The HOA board was effective and honest. Property values had actually increased once word got out about how we'd cleaned house and implemented strong oversight measures. In October, I got an unexpected call from a producer at a Chicago television station. They wanted to do a story about HOA fraud and reform, using Oakmont Hills as the centerpiece. I agreed to be interviewed, along with Jennifer Novick and Robert Yates. The interview took place at my house, with the camera crew setting up in my living room. The interviewer was a sharp woman named Angela Chen, who'd been reporting on consumer issues for years. "Mr. Zimmerman, take me back to that day in January when you discovered your rock salt was missing. What went through your mind, honestly?" My first thought was disbelief. I couldn't believe someone would steal rock salt. It seemed so petty. But then, when I realized it was the HOA, I got angry. These were people we'd entrusted to manage community resources and make decisions on our behalf. If they'd steal rock salt, what else were they stealing? And that question led to uncovering years of embezzlement. Yes, sometimes the small crimes expose the bigger ones. If Patricia Henderson and her board had just done their jobs honestly, none of this would have come to light. But criminals often can't help themselves. They start with small thefts and work their way up to larger ones because they don't get caught. What would you say to other homeowners who suspect their HOA might be mismanaging funds? Trust your instincts. If something seems off, it probably is. Request financial records. You have that right under Illinois law. Consider hiring a forensic accountant if the numbers don't add up. And don't be afraid to file complaints with the police and the Attorney General's office. These are serious crimes, and they should be treated as such. The segment aired 2 weeks later during the evening news. It was strange seeing myself on television, but the response was overwhelming. I received emails from people across Illinois and even from other states, thanking me for speaking out and asking for advice on how to investigate their own HOAs. I created a simple guide based on my experience and posted it online. It covered the basics: how to request financial records, what red flags to look for, how to hire a forensic accountant, and what legal remedies were available. The guide was downloaded thousands of times in the first week alone. By December, as the third winter in Oakmont Hills approached, I felt like I'd finally moved past the whole ordeal. Yes, it had defined the past 2 years of my life in many ways, but it wasn't who I was. I was just a guy who'd stood up for what was right when the moment called for it. I bought my rock salt early again, 25 bags this time. I hauled them home and stacked them in my garage. My security cameras kept watch, though I doubted I'd need them for rock salt theft again. The HOA had learned its lesson, and the community was stronger for it. On Christmas Eve, I was surprised by a knock at my door. When I opened it, I found a group of neighbors standing there with a wrapped gift. Robert Yates was at the front, holding a plaque. "Ethan, we wanted to give you this," he said. "It's from all of us." The plaque read, "To Ethan Zimmerman, in recognition of his courage, integrity, and dedication to community accountability. Your actions made Oakmont Hills a better place for everyone." I was genuinely touched. "This is incredible. Thank you all." "No, thank you," Jennifer Novick said. "You could have just let the rock salt thing go. You could have decided it wasn't worth the fight, but you stood up to bullies, and you exposed corruption that was hurting all of us. That matters." We all stood there in the cold for a few minutes, talking and laughing. Finally, people started heading home to their own Christmas Eve celebrations. I went back inside, hung the plaque on my wall next to the letter from the Attorney General, and sat down by my fireplace. The fire crackled warmly, and snow was beginning to fall outside. I thought about everything that had happened, from that first moment of discovering my rock salt was missing to receiving a plaque from grateful neighbors. It had been a wild journey, one I never expected to take when I bought my house in this neighborhood. But I'd learned important lessons. I'd learned that HOAs could be forces for good when run properly, but they could also become vehicles for corruption and abuse when there was no oversight. I'd learned that speaking up matters, even when it's difficult or uncomfortable. I'd learned that communities are strongest when people work together and hold their leaders accountable. Most importantly, I'd learned that 6 bags of rock salt could change everything if you refuse to let theft and corruption slide. The final chapter of the saga came in February, almost exactly 2 years after the original theft. Patricia Henderson was released from prison on good behavior. I heard she'd moved to Wisconsin to live with her sister, far away from Oakmont Hills and the community she'd betrayed. She was still making restitution payments and would be for years to come. I didn't take any pleasure in her downfall. I wasn't vindictive by nature, but I did feel satisfied knowing that justice had been served and that she could never do this to another community again. Life in Oakmont Hills continued peacefully. The HOA functioned well under honest leadership. Property values remained strong. The neighborhood was a genuinely nice place to live, which is all anyone really wants. And whenever winter came and I stacked my rock salt in the garage, I'd remember how this all started. 6 bags of stolen rock salt during an ice storm. Such a small thing that exposed such large corruption. It made me wonder how many other small injustices in the world hide bigger problems, waiting for someone to stand up and say, "This isn't right." I was just glad I'd been that someone, at least for my community, and I hoped my story would inspire others to do the same in theirs. Because change doesn't usually come from grand gestures or dramatic moments. It comes from regular people deciding that enough is enough and refusing to let wrongdoing slide, no matter how small it might seem. That's the real lesson of the rock salt theft. Every act of standing up for what's right matters, because you never know what larger injustice it might expose or what positive change it might create. The 6 bags of rock salt that Patricia Henderson stole ended up costing her far more than their market value. They cost her freedom, reputation, and $63,000 in restitution. And for Oakmont Hills, those 6 bags ultimately brought about reform, accountability, and a stronger sense of community. Not a bad return on investment for $120 worth of rock salt. As spring approached and the last of the snow melted away, I put my rock salt bags in storage for next winter. I'd learned my lesson about preparation, and I knew the HOA had learned theirs too. The cycle would continue. Winter would come, snow would fall, and we'd be ready with properly purchased, legally obtained rock salt for everyone who needed it. And that, in the end, was all I'd wanted from the beginning. A community that worked fairly for everyone, where leaders served honestly and residents could trust that their rights and property would be respected. It had taken a theft, an investigation, arrests and trials to get there, but we'd made it. Oakmont Hills was home now, truly home, in a way it couldn't have been under Patricia Henderson's corrupt regime. And every time I drove through the neighborhood, seeing well-maintained common areas and happy neighbors, I felt proud to have played a part in making that possible. All because I refused to let someone steal my rock salt.